Hallo zusammen und willkommen zu einer neuen Folge von The Digital Download. Oops. Good afternoon, good morning, and good day, wherever you may be joining us from. Welcome to a new edition of The Digital Download, the longest running weekly business talk show on LinkedIn Live. Now globally syndicated on TuneIn Radio through IBGR, the world's number one business talk, news, and strategy radio network. Today, we cut through the noise surrounding artificial intelligence to discuss how businesses can achieve real growth. We have a special guest, Yogesh Shavda, to help us with the discussion. Yogesh is an AI strategy advisor for CMOs, keynote speaker, and founder of Y2S Consulting. But before we bring Yogesh on, let's go around the set and introduce everyone. While we're doing that, why don't you in the audience reach out to a friend, ping them, and have them join us? We strive to make the digital download an interactive experience, and audience participation is obviously highly encouraged. Adam, would you like to kick us off?
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. My name's Adam Gray. I'm co-founder of DLA Ignite, and I do love conversations about AI. This is like the happening place at the moment. But I did think that during your introduction, Bertrand, you do different languages sometimes. Maybe you should try different accents next time. So you could say it in English, but you could say it in a French accent, a Geordie accent, a Welsh accent, a Scottish accent, which would kind of challenge you a bit because you speak so many languages.
Yeah. I speak a few sentences. Thank you, Adam. Tim.
Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, my name is Tim Hughes. Welcome. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite, and I'm famous for writing the book Social Selling: Techniques to Influence Buyers and Changemakers. I've just rushed here from a AI conference in London that I was speaking at yesterday and I was at today. And I've learned lots of things about AI, and I think it's one of those things that you can always learn something about. Every day is a school day.
Absolutely. And I can't agree more. Myself, Bertrand Godillot, I am the founder and managing partner of Odysseus & Co., and we are a very proud DLA Ignite partner. So as I said, this week on the Digital Download, we'll speak with Yogesh. With over 20 years of experience as a former global brand leader at companies like P&G, Spotify, and Pinterest, Yogesh that was tough for me. Specializes in helping executive teams unlock growth through AI-powered marketing. Let's bring him on. Let's do that.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Yogesh.
Good morning and welcome, Yogesh.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
You're more than welcome. Let's start by having you tell us a little bit more about you, your background, and what led you where you are today.
Sure. So I'm from India originally. I never lived in India, although I do speak two languages. So when you talked in German, I was thinking about actually inserting some things in Hindi or Gujarati as well. But I'll save you the my embarrassment of doing that. I grew up in actually a little island in the Persian Gulf called Bahrain, and I went to school there, came to the US for my university education, got an undergraduate degree in electrical engineering, and then my MBA from the University of South Carolina. And then I was on a whirlwind. Like you mentioned, I worked at Procter & Gamble for 17 years. I worked at Kimberly-Clark and Amway, and then Spotify, Pinterest. And then my last corporate job actually was with a hearing aids company out of Denmark called WS Audiology. Right now, I'm actually doing two things. I'm a lecturer at the University of South Carolina, where I teach classes, marketing classes to seniors at the undergraduate level and MBA students. So I was also rushing back actually last night from Columbia. We were just having orientation for the MBA class, the incoming MBA class. And the second thing I do is my consulting work, which you also mentioned. I'm the founder of Y2S Consulting. So I do a lot of work in the AI space, especially in the last couple of years. And there's also another passion area, which we might touch upon, which is brands operating in stigmatized industries. So that became a bit of a fascination point for me when I was working in the hearing aids industry. And I've just kind of fully just jumped in, trying to understand what stigma means for brands as well. So.
Mm-hmm. Okay, excellent. Well, quite a journey, and thank you for joining us today. So, Yogesh, let's start with a foundational question. What is the difference between AI experimentation and a true enterprise scale application?
Oh, great question. So, if you think about how quickly AI has taken the world by storm since I want to say November or December of 2022, everybody was unsure what that meant, right? So, generative AI specifically was offering new capabilities that people weren't really sure what to go do with. So, for the I want to say for most of 2023 and probably even going into 2024, there was a lot of experimentation going on in terms of what do we even do with this? Is this something that's relevant to our business? Is it relevant to our functional space and so on and so forth? To adopt it at the enterprise level and to really make it part of your work stream and things like that, two things have to be true. You're seeing value in what the tool actually has to offer, number one. And number two, it has to be connected to what kind of output and outcomes you're looking for. And if you're able to figure those two things out, that's when you can actually start scaling and make it to an enterprise solution or a departmental solution or whatever the case may be. This year, I feel some of the larger companies are starting to get to that phase, but the majority of companies that are out there are still in the experimentation phase because they haven't figured out yet exactly how to go use it. In fact, I would even argue and say the majority of companies are still in the early adoption phase of should I even do this or not? And there's a lot of hesitancy around that. And we can speak, we can spend some time talking about that if you're interested.
Yeah, and actually, there are many studies backing up what you just said in terms of real scale adoption, which is also, to me, also a question mark as to the gap, the growing gap, or
Hmm.
the deepening gap. I don't know how we want to phrase it,
Yeah.
between individual adoption
Hmm.
and AI adoption into business processes, I would say, or into enterprise apps, applications, um, and how do you manage that gap? So because there's this expectation that from a business process perspective, that should be as efficient as what I'm doing with my own assistant, my personal assistant, and
Right.
sometimes not the case. So
Yeah, you're
we,
totally
we
right. And I speak to at least 3 or 4 companies every week right now,
mhm,
and the number one thing I hear back from them from an adoption perspective is that you're right, everyone's dabbling with playing with ChatGPT or Gemini or
mhm,
Claude or whatever
mhm,
large language model they want to play with individually, right? They may even use it to help them craft their emails. They may use it just to do some sort of research on a particular topic. Those have been like the basic, and early use cases that most individuals have. But to
mhm,
adopt inside a company, there's some barriers that have emerged, which companies have to kind of like come to terms with. The number one being security and privacy, right? Companies are very afraid of having their proprietary information being put onto ChatGPT, and the fear is that it'll leak into the training model for ChatGPT, and therefore their information then becomes quote unquote public, right? I have yet to see a situation emerge where that's actually happened. If it's happening, it's definitely behind the scenes, perhaps. I'm not
mhm,
saying it's
mhm,
not happening. I'm just saying that I'm not seeing it. So there's a lot of fear out there in terms of this issue. Some of it's real. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to minimize it or belittle it, right? But at least based on what OpenAI is saying, I'll use them as an example. They're very clear about when and where your data can get used from a training set perspective, right? Um, if you have an account like a pro account or a team account, right, or a subscription account, there's actually a switch in the settings where you can say, do you want your data to go into the training model or not, right? So you have some control from that perspective. The question is, do you believe it,
mhm,
right? So from my consulting perspective, when I'm engaged with clients, I actually have in my statement of work, I say that if you want me to use your data, I need written permission from you approving me to put it onto ChatGPT, I'm not going to put it by myself because I don't want to take on that risk, as an example.
I've got a question, and this is something that I guess I personally wrestle with in this
Mhm.
space. So we've played with AI, and we've kind of got some fairly advanced ghostwriting kind of deployments and stuff like that. And it seems to me that AI is very good at moving people from being incompetent to being competent at
Mhm.
something.
Mhm.
But it's very poor or not capable of moving people from being good at something to being brilliant at something. So, uh, how can people deploy this in a safe way? Because it seems like it's very good at doing repetitive tasks,
Mhm.
which requires a certain degree of tooling up and connectors being built and all of that sort of thing.
Mhm.
But it's very poor at doing the stuff that we traditionally would have done. So writing copy, uh,
Mhm.
because it percolates down, and it uses appropriate words and phrases, but it doesn't inject any personality, obviously, into
Mhm.
this. Uh, so is that a reasonable belief system to have around this, or are things changing to the point where actually this can do the job as well as skilled people?
It can do the job as well as skilled people. The thing is, how do you actually set it up to allow you to do that, right? So if you're just using basic prompts, then it's what you described
Mm,
at the beginning of your point. You can develop agents. It's called agents on ChatGPT. It's called gems on Gemini. I think it's called projects on Claude, where you can set your prompts in terms of the context. What is your objective? What is the framework you want the agent to use, and what is the kind of output you're looking for? And you can get extremely specific in saying, when you give me the output, these are the 3 or 4 things I want the output to include, right? So once you've played around with it enough, you can actually have it create copy for you. It can be your content strategist. It can be your social media planning calendar kind of tool. Now you can say, okay, but it's using past data, therefore it's only going to regurgitate and give me the same exact thing that's been done in the past, right? That's a very common refrain that I hear, and I've also seen, quite frankly speaking.
mm.
So you can actually, again, add into the prompts and say, do an online search for these specific brands, check what they have posted, make sure you don't post the same exact thing, right? So that's one thing you can do to kind of at least ensure that it's not copying and pasting or whatever from other competitors. The other thing you can do, which not a lot of people know, right? And I also learned this, I wouldn't say in the last 4 or 5 months myself. There's actually a setting that you can play around with on these large language models. It's called temperature, not the temperature to measure the weather, right? It's on a scale of 0 to 1, and it basically, what you're doing is, if you set it close to 0, you're telling ChatGPT to say, be more consistent, be more reliable, and give me consistent information back. So if I do the same prompts 10 times, 9 out of 10 times, I'll probably get the same exact kind of answer. But if you put it closer to 1, you're telling ChatGPT to be more creative, right? So, in other words, when you put the same prompt 10 different times, you're not going to get the same kinds of responses every single time, because you've actually set it up to give you more, creative responses. Hence the word generative AI, right? This is something that most people don't know,
Mm.
right?
They do now.
They do. They do now, exactly.
Remember where you heard this first.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Now, and by the way, I'm not a technical person by any means, so I may have even completely screwed up in my description of this. So, if I have, please don't come after me. Go do your own research, and you'll find out more about temperature. But the reason why I'm bringing this up is that when you see people start, complaining and saying, "Oh, these large language models are terrible. They don't give you consistent results. They don't do this. They don't do that." There are things inside the algorithm that you can actually go and toggle, and when you do it, you can get what you're looking for, but you have to kind of at least start understanding what those vectors or dimensions or toggles are, so you can get the kind of things that you're looking for. That's the beauty of what they've built here.
But is it capable of produce? So you're an expert in your fields.
Mhm.
If you taught it everything you know and
Mhm.
you configure it to write things that operate within your preferred bandwidth in terms of delivering everything the same or some kind of spread on this,
Yeah.
can you then go and live on a beach?
Well, that's a totally different conversation in terms of how do you actually monetize, right? Um, I personally think, here's what I've read, and I'm starting to actually believe it to a certain degree. People believe that, oh, I can create my own value proposition using, ChatGPT, and I keep on using ChatGPT because that's the one I'm most familiar with. And by no means am I denigrating other large language models. They're all very good in their own right. If you're using ChatGPT and you're building a value prop around that as a vendor or to offer a solution, the expectation is that you're offering something that's unique and different, right? Here's the problem problems that I'm seeing happen. A lot more people are starting to copy and do the same exact kind of thing. Not necessarily your version, but their version of it, but it's all playing in the same space. So you have hundreds of people doing exactly the same thing. Number one. Number two, these large language models are also learning, and they're introducing updates that are actually building those things into their large language model, anyways. So even if you have a business that started with an LLM as the at the root of it, odds are it won't survive for more than a couple of years at best, simply because these companies are integrating all that stuff into their systems, anyways, right? So that's issue number one. Issue number two is that to drive revenue, right, you have to be able to demonstrate value, not just efficiency. You have to demonstrate value, right? And that's hard to do in some instances. So how do you price it? How do you actually create, a revenue generation model? I'm seeing like two or three companies that are actually doing it fairly well. There's a company out of the Czech Republic called Fifth Row that I came across. I actually had their director on my podcast, a few weeks ago, talking about their company. What they've done basically is they've completely disrupted the consulting world because they've built up all these agentic models, right, that do all the stuff that consultants do, all the research, all the situational analysis, all the brand positioning work, etc. It's all automated. So you're just basically buying that automation, and within minutes, literally, you're getting the output that you need, and you don't have to go spend $1 million and 6 months of work with a consultant to go do that, right? And that's one of the reasons why you're seeing McKinsey, for example. They announced a few months ago that they're going to not hire as many people anymore, and they're going to start shaving off their headcount. I think this is the beginning of those kinds of changes that are happening, right?
It's a and I'm pretty, I fully agree, of course, on the trend and what you're saying, etc. And I think a little bit to go back to what Adam was saying earlier. Um, First of all, I think that there is a difference between corporate communications, you could say, or corporate generated content and personal generated
Mhm.
content. And it's more obvious on personal because we are all individuals and we think differently and we speak differently and we use different terms.
Mhm.
Um, and back to what you were saying, when we are into the corporate world, where is the differentiation? So, in other words, can AI factor in your differentiation? Can
Mhm.
your AI
Mhm.
engine or agents, your gems, your whatever,
Yeah.
factor take into account your differentiation, even potentially define your own differentiation, but based on what you're telling them,
Mhm.
and write on it, or is it just um, like we've seen in a number of times, the exact same waffling, average, average content, average value, therefore,
Yeah.
that we see all over the place.
Yeah, look, I worry about that also, right? And I'll give you a specific example from last summer. My very first client that I got, where I had literally, sold them some AI solutions that I had developed, personally. I have an agent that can build out a segmentation, for example. I have an agent that can build out new product concepts, for example, right? So these were, I built them based on my experience of working in marketing and insights, over a 25 plus year career. So when this company basically asked me to help them with their brand turnaround, they said, "Look, Yogesh, we need a segmentation. We don't have a segmentation. Can you do it?" I said, "Okay, how much time do I have?" They said, traditionally, if you do it with a market research firm, it takes 6 months, maybe even a year. You spend $150,000 and you've got something, right? I turned the whole thing around in 72 hours, right? I'm going into the presentation feeling very nervous because I'd done the work. I knew what I had done, right? But I didn't know from a domain or industry perspective whether I was on the right path or not, because it's not my industry. I don't know the nuances of the industry.
That was a bet. That was a
Right?
bet.
That was a bet, right? So I went in thinking, okay, if I'm at least 60% of the way there, is that good enough, or is it supposed to be 80%? No idea. What ended up happening after a 2.5, 3 hour presentation is that the feedback I got was, we thought we were focused on this particular target here, but we're actually talking to the other target over there when we should really be talking to the other guys on that side of the spectrum. And it became an entire strategy conversation. And I'm sitting there thinking, holy cow, did I get something here? First of all, did I get this right? So I asked them, do you mind if we do some actual human, focus
Double
groups? So
check.
this was a validation thing, which they agreed to do. We did that, and it was completely on par. So that was my first, call it proof of concept, right? And it gave me a heck of a lot of confidence in terms of what I was getting out of it. And quite frankly, as I've done more of these with other companies, and I've also done them like I've done live demos in industry, conferences or whatever. My suspicion, and I call it suspicion. I'm not trying to sell. I'm just telling you
Or maybe
how I feel.
intuition. Intuition
Yeah,
is maybe more positive.
yeah, exactly. Intuition is that, even with market research data, running it and creating a segmentation, there are limitations on what they also do, right? If they are giving you a solution that's 80% of the way there, I'm probably at 70% myself with my AI tool. So the gap isn't that big, right? And the difference, to get from 70% to 100% is actually the human who brings in their knowledge either as a subject matter expert or as the domain expert, and that's how you close the gap.
So are we turning into a bunch of experts checking the output of the? So are we serving the engine, or is the engine serving us? Or is it a fair deal? I don't know.
I'm calling it
So I
AI.
think the answer is potentially this one, by the way.
You're right. I completely understand where you're coming from. I actually call it AI plus human collaboration. Okay, so it's not one serving the other. It's really using it as a co-pilot or a partner. So, just like how I'm sure, the three of you are bouncing off ideas of each other, right? When you're talking about, whatever topic, you're just having a fourth one now called an AI engine that's doing it with you and partnering with
Actually,
you.
we've got 3 other ones.
There you go. There you go. Exactly. Right. So, in fact, I've actually named my ChatGPT now. I've set the settings in terms of how it should talk back with me. And I eventually said, I should give you a name. So I said, what kind of name should I give you? So it came back to me with a name called GIA, right? Generative Ideation Assistant. So short form GIA. So I call my ChatGPT GIA. And it's kind of like got to the point now where I'm almost calling it my work wife because it's giving me good advice. So it's, yeah.
But is it? Is my is it? And I'm deliberately playing devil's advocate here, but
Yeah.
because we hear so much about AI hallucination. We hear so much about AI, even if it's not outright lying to us, it believes it's telling the truth in some instances when it isn't. So a friend of ours, he's an AI expert, and he and I'll change the names here. He said he went to Twitter, and he said, what was it that Yogesh Chafta said about AI being very human? And Grok came back and it said, yeah, he said the following thing. So Richard then said to Grok, he didn't say that, did he? No, he didn't actually say it, but that is indicative of what Yogesh would have said. He said, okay, so I want you to go back and find the tweet that he sent that basically said this. So then Grok came back and it said, okay, November the 17th at 8:42 p.m., this is what Yogesh said. So he thought, I'm not sure. So he wound back through the Twitter feed and it wasn't there. And he said, he then said to Grok, that tweet isn't there, the tweet that you've referenced. And Grok said, isn't it? I thought it was. So part of this is about AI making mistakes. And one of the issues that I see is a human behavioral issue. So it doesn't matter whether we're talking about this being work that AI has done or work that is pre-written at scripts in the software that we use and that kind of thing. It's that you don't believe that what you have to say is better than the thing that it's saying. So this idea of I'm going to go back in and edit this stuff, actually, I believe that most people won't, because they'll read it and they'll say, A, it's fit for purpose, and B, if I do have any doubts about how compelling or engaging this thing is, I'm not sure that I can do it any better, so I won't even try. And surely that's a big issue for people using these tools, isn't it?
I completely agree with you, and you've hit on what I call one of the limits of AI. You know, the use cases for AI, generative AI overall, right? Every time I've asked any AI tool, it doesn't matter which one, to find me a quote or to find me a reference from something that's been said, what I find usually is it's paraphrasing something. It's not giving me the specific quote. I can't go find it exactly on whether it's a video or even an article. I can't find the actual quote itself. It has a hard time doing that. Claude and Perplexity are the two that I find that have actually invested more time in trying to get to that degree of specificity. So if I had to use a model to help me do what you're describing, I would probably use Perplexity, then Claude. I would not use ChatGPT to help me with that kind of analysis, quite frankly speaking. So that's point number one. Point number two, I would say, is that when you're trying to sorry, let me say this way. You should always verify. You should always verify. It doesn't matter what you're doing. You should always verify what you're doing. All four of us have enough experience in our space that when you see something, you know immediately that, hey, this doesn't smell right. Therefore, I need to go double check, right? Because we've got experience, right, in our space. Imagine now for a 22-year-old who's using this, who doesn't have the experience and is using it, right? What do we do with that? As a university lecturer, that is my biggest worry right now. So when I said I was rushing back last night, it's because we had orientation yesterday or this week for our MBA students, and one of my session was about AI usage while they're in the MBA program, and then what do they do after when they're trying to look for a job, basically, right? And part of what I was basically telling them is that you need to verify, you need to interpret, you need to make sure that you're double checking everything so that you're not copying and pasting something straight out of ChatGPT onto your paper or onto your presentation, because the professors will see it right away and they'll be like, nope, that's not right, and then you'll get screwed, right? So you have to put in the effort and you have to do that critical thinking, right? And if you don't have that domain expertise or subject matter expertise, then you need to make that part of your process of learning so that when you are seeing stuff coming out of ChatGPT, you can verify it.
So we got a great comment from Lawrence there. It will cause disagreement in business because the chatbot told me. ... No, and I think that's really true, isn't it? Because one of the most spoken about benefits of AI is pouring your own data and content into it, and then using it as a tool so that agents, human agents, as well as
Mhm.
digital agents, but human agents have then got access to the right information immediately.
Mhm.
And actually, this is like completely at odds with that, isn't it? And we will get a lot of this kind of, well, the chatbot told me this is how I should answer that question, even if in my gut I think it actually isn't the way I should answer this question.
Well, my counsel on this one is always trust your gut.
Mm.
Your gut's never wrong, right? So if you're smelling something that says, this doesn't sound right, it probably isn't right. You can't explain it at that point in time, right? You'll probably have to go do some additional, work to as and as you go through that verification process, you'll either say, "Oh, my gut was wrong," or "No, my gut was actually right."
Yeah, but
I'm of the belief that
you,
your gut's always right. So
Yogesh, as a man in his mid-30s, do you see what I did there? As a man in his mid-30s, you've got 10 or 15 years experience. As,
yep.
as you said about, young people coming into the workplace, a lot of the low-level, non expert-driven jobs where people have
Mhm.
basically done their apprenticeship, they've cut their teeth
Mhm.
doing these jobs. Those jobs are now going to be replaced by AI. So you're going to be, as a 30-year-old, you're going to go straight into a much more senior position, a position that
Mhm.
perhaps you haven't got that basic understanding of.
Mhm.
And certainly the people that are acting in this agent, position,
Mhm.
those are people that you say about, your gut's never wrong. Well, actually, if you're 20, your gut is wrong because you haven't got the framework and the understanding that we've got.
That is true. That's true. And maybe I'm being a bit too, maybe my age is now starting to show in my mid 30s, as you said. Uh, you know, the Here's the thing, right? If you're going to go look for a specific answer and you're trying to make it into a binary situation of it's yes, it's correct, or no, it's not correct, you're playing a probability game at the end of the day, with these tools that are actually using probabilities as a way as part of their prediction process, right? So that's the issue. I personally believe that rather than trying to go for prediction and accuracy, I'd rather go with the mindset of framework. Give me a framework, help me structure my thinking, and have ChatGPT help me structure that process so that I have a way to think about the problem. Because half the problem in business, as we all know, is that we are dealing with an ambiguous situation or an uncertain situation, and we don't know which way to go. We're trying to make a decision, right? And one of the things that I've learned in my career is that if you put in place a framework that allows you to uh, uh, analyze the situation, identify the options, have criteria for deciding which is the appropriate option, and the risk that goes with each criteria and then with each option, then you've got a way to decide which way to go. And you can make the right or appropriate recommendation to your senior leaders in the company and so on and so forth. In the process that I just described, these large language models are brilliant in helping you define the process and the frameworks. And then the content that goes behind it, right? Some of it may come from these large language models, but a lot of it will come from experts who know the field and who can actually say, my experience tells me X, and this is what we should think about as part of the process. And that integration that has to happen, that's where the large language models are also very good at in helping you integrate, right?
Right.
And
So I'm coming with the point of view that it's a tool. Let's treat it as a tool. It's going to have its strengths and limits, like any tool does. But the role of the human still is to think about how to use the tool for its strengths and integrate it into the work that you're actually doing. And when you hit that, that's when you get the best out of the tool, as opposed to then worrying about the worst of the tool.
Mm.
yeah, love that, and and because I think we're talking outcomes. You started the discussion with outcomes and value, um, and that was probably what was missing in most companies, not the ones that are releasing this now, but in most companies. So, what would be your how do you drive this with your in your with your customers, basically, and
Yeah,
especially at the executive level?
yeah. So, value at the end of the day, it'll always tie back to revenue and profit growth, right? That's going to be the case. Am I able to drive revenue or not? The third one you can talk about is efficiency. And that's where everybody starts the conversation. I'm doing things, what took me 6 months to do, I can do it within 1 week now, or whatever time frame you want to use, right? The other part of efficiency is, I don't need 10 people, I can do this now with 3 people, and that's the scary part in this entire conversation, right? But and all those things may be true and may be right, fair enough, but the value part is the harder part to go solve for. So where does the value come from? So let's say, for example, going back to the example I gave you about that company that I did that project with, right? The segmentation stuff. And it wasn't just segmentation, I was actually coming up with brand concepts and things like that. As I was doing the work, I was seeing that there were blind spots that the company had about how they were executing their go-to-market strategies, right? I don't think they would have picked it up had we not gone through the process that we had gone through in terms of using these large language models, right? And it's not that they didn't know it, they knew it. I just don't think they had given it sufficient time and energy to emphasize and prioritize it. But the AI work we did helped them understand and say, oh my gosh, this is a bigger deal than we thought, and we have to relentlessly focus on this thing, and we have to make it our number one priority for the brand if we want to drive growth, right? And for me, that was value right there. It wasn't about efficiency. It was all about helping them realize that this was the most important segment that they should go after, because not only does it actually win them, new user acquisition, it also helps them with retention, a couple of years down the road, if they have a positive experience with their brand. And they hadn't thought that part through. Right? So to me, sometimes you have to think about what is the value that you can actually offer, right? You can sell it as a efficiency play, but that's not going to get you the longer term win. It's the value play that's going to give you the longer term play.
So when a company is thinking about deploying AI, and I imagine that pretty much every company is thinking about deploying AI.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We're told that AI can do the work of 1,000 people in, simultaneously, and it can shorten processes from months and years to days and weeks, and everything is rosy and perfect. So I'm the CEO of Big Corp, and I think, right, we need to be getting into this AI journey.
Mm-hmm.
What now? Because actually, are we in a situation for many organizations where this is a solution hunting for a problem? And we know that it's got all of these amazing gains to be had, but where? How can I use that? How can I start to make inroads with this to make my business more profitable, more solid, more innovative, whatever the outcomes I'm looking for are?
Yeah, great question, right? And this is exactly the questions a lot of senior leaders are actually asking, right? The first thing I would say is that you have an organization, especially if it's a large company, right, or even a medium-sized company, you'll have a few hundred people perhaps working in your company. Job number one: train them, give them access to the tool, and train them on how to use the tool, right? Because part of the problem is that if you hold them back or you don't give them access to the full process of being able to use all the tools, then you're just limiting their ability. And I'll give you examples. Copilot, that's one of the most popular ones at the organizational level because it's part of the Microsoft suite right now, right? But some companies, what they'll do is, okay, we'll give you access to Copilot, but we will not give you access to the agent building process of it. To me, that's shooting yourself in the foot, because every time I have to do something, I have to go back in and reprompt the same exact thing. So, what should have been an easy thing for me to do has now become a hard thing to do because I've kept on going back and reprompting to get that repetitive task to actually happen. Not helpful, right? So number one, give them access to the tools, educate them on how to use the tools. Start with that. And then give your organization the space to experiment, over a 6-month period, 12-month period. Pick a time frame and say, I want your department to go run 5 experiments and tell me what you're getting out of those 5 experiments. Tell me what the experiments are and how does it tie to the business that we're trying to do, and let's see what actually happens, right? So create a what I call an experimentation plan, right? coming out of the experiments, have an assessment process to say which experiments are working and which ones are not working. There was an article that came out from J&J that said that 20% of their experiments that they ran actually worked, 80% did not work, right? Let's assume that's true for everyone, right? So if only 1 in 5 are working, right, then at least you now know which ones are actually working. And if they're working for one department, then the question becomes, how do they tie into the rest of the organization? And if there is something that's there, then how are you going to actually kind of like connect all of them together across the department so that you can actually get the output that you're looking for? In that, what happens, there's going to come a realization within the company of saying, oh my God, our data is fragmented and siloed. What do we do about that? Or even more importantly, my data is actually not even clean, right? For some people and for some companies, that becomes the barrier, and they'll say, oh, data's not clean, can't use it, therefore let's not even do it. I've been in that situation. And my point of view is you need to go into the data and start experimenting to see what actually happens, right? In one experience that I got, not with generative AI, but in the prediction side of it, we were using Salesforce data, and the CMO kept on saying, data's bad, data's bad, data's bad. But we went into the data, 94% of the data was actually really good. That final 6% wasn't. And it was mainly because fields were missing, sales reps were not filling in the data, sometimes it was inconsistent, and sometimes there were just mistakes that happened. But at least we knew that 94% was actually accurate versus making this generic statement of saying the data is bad. Now we know. And that final 6%, you can clean it up over a quarter or two, which is what we did, right? So you have to go through this in steps, and you need to have a strategy in terms of how you want to go about doing it. Of course, you need to have guardrails so that, proprietary data, PII data, all that stuff has to be, protected. Give people those guardrails, and then the organization will go in and act against, in that sandbox, if you want to call it that, right? But give people the space to go experiment, and then give them a way of showing them how will you actually then start scaling it across your organization. That's kind of like what I would be proposing to companies in terms of how to go about starting the process. What I've also found in this process is that the people who are, not everyone's going to embrace it right away, but there will be champions who will emerge. Give them the space to actually champion it, and give them the resources to help them scale it. Those who are hesitant or cautious or just saying, I don't want to do it, the cautious and the hesitance will eventually come on board. But those who are saying, no, 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 I will never do it, then it's a question for you from an HR perspective of saying that, hey, this is the new world. Are you on board or not? And if you're not on board, then what's your role within the organization? And that, I think, is a very legitimate conversation to have. We do this regardless of AI, we've been doing this anyways, right? So this is another use case in that, with a new tool in this case.
So have we got any really great case studies? Because Tim and I were at a conference a month or so ago, and there were a series of roundtables, and the only company that I'll mention in this instance is Microsoft. They were one of the guest speakers there, but there were a number of companies that were kind of consulting in the AI space, and they were tech businesses, and they were Microsoft implementers, and they were consulting organizations, and all of them spoke about the customer opportunity. And it became apparent, and Tim and I discussed this at the end of the session, it became apparent that none of these organizations had a case study. None of them. What they were doing is they were talking in either a theoretical or we're currently at the early stages of doing this kind of position on it. Even Microsoft, the only one customer case study they had was themselves, customer zero. Where they were able to say, okay, this is where we have seen wins from implementing this in our own organization. And it strikes me that there's as the amount of airtime AI gets and the promise of all of this change. And Tim and I have seen it with social, where one, I think it was a marketing director of an organization, said, it's not worth me getting on Twitter. If it'd been 2 years ago, I would have got on it, but now it isn't. And, like the old Chinese proverb about the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, the next best time is now. So the ship for AI hasn't sailed. It's not even at the point of leaving the harbor yet. So how do organizations hold on to that belief and realize that they're not falling behind, but they do need to act?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and quite frankly, the it's a hard question to answer because um, most companies, major large companies, are all experimenting. There's no question about that. The challenge is that everyone's been in the experimentation phase so far. So that's why you're seeing, the one-off use cases that are coming out.
Yeah.
But I would say probably in the next 2 years or 3 years, we'll actually start seeing scaled solutions that are actually having a business impact, because we're right now in the midst of that journey right now.
Yeah.
Right, because remember, this is only 2 years old. We're not talking about something that's been around for 2 decades, right? So, well, AI has been around for multiple decades, but generative AI has only been around for a couple of years. And the accessibility is obviously, the democratization of generative AI has only happened in the last couple of years. So I think we are. It's too early to tell, is the answer I would give. But more importantly, linked with that, the examples of what you're seeing are actually what I pay a lot of attention to in terms of use cases, right? Because if one company is doing it one way, another company is doing it a different way, there's something there as to why did they go down that pathway. That tells you about how they think about their business or their category, and is there something to be said about that, right? So you can kind of like almost reverse engineer and figure out what's happening. And that can actually be an interesting situation as well. And if I may give a very quick example on what I mean by reverse engineering, just to make the point about the power of these tools. Last year around Valentine's Day, I was talking about one of my agents that I'd built, and I said, okay, it's Valentine's Day is coming up. Let me write about chocolate. So I did this, exercise around, ideation and innovation ideas for a chocolate brand. And I picked some company out of the UK. I didn't know the name of the company. I didn't know much about it, but I said, yeah, let me just pick them, for fun. They seem like a great company. You know, I'll do this and I'll just post it. The mistake I made when I posted it is I forgot to put a very important caveat in there saying this is a hypothetical example. I just forgot, and I posted it. A week later, I got a DM on LinkedIn from some PR agency in the US saying that we talked with the leaders of that company, and they haven't worked with you. You're misrepresenting yourself. You need to pull that post down. And I was like, yeah, fair enough. My bad. Totally accept that part of it. But there was a second paragraph after that, which is what scared me. What scared me was they said, you expose flaws in our business model, and if our customers find this out, that would be detrimental to our revenue. And I'm sitting there thinking, excuse me? Like, what did I expose that was so detrimental to you? Like, if anything, I was actually trying to help you guys for free by posting this, but the learning that I got from that, first of all, you'll still find the post there. You will not find the brand name there. I turned it into brand X basically. So, I refused to take that post down because I think there's something there. But more importantly, the power of these tools can help you think through and identify opportunities. It can also help you identify weaknesses on your brand, and that can help you then do the things that you need to go do. So to your question that you're asking, right, from a use case perspective and from a solution perspective, companies have to be thinking about the strengths of the tool in terms of what it can do for you, and don't get hung up on all the things it can't do for you. That's where all the spaces, that's where all the airtime's being given right now.
Yeah.
And to me, that's not helpful.
Mm. That would be potentially my last question, Yogesh. But going back to the starting point of value and outcomes, are you just saying that companies are experiencing because they have no idea what the outcome can be? Or they are on a hunt for value, or what's how would you say that?
I would say that companies have a sense of what. Well, let's put it this way: the edict is go figure it out, right? From the CEO, let's say, or the CMO, or whoever, right? It's up to middle management and the team leaders to say, okay, now let's go figure out how is this actually going to work for me, or for my department, right? And that's when the value generation will actually happen. And my whole thing is that, if you're going to, tie one hand behind their back and then say, go figure out the value, you're not setting them up for success. Right. So if you're going to do it full, go all in, do it, learn, and then move on. If either the experiment is going to fail or it's going to succeed. If it succeeded, then how do I think about taking it to the next level? That should be that experimentation mindset. One other thing I'll say is that this time has, I think, forcing everybody to get out of the mindset of, oh, I'll just go search and reapply, and that's going to be good enough for my business. This is forcing us to actually go innovate, which means we have to be far more intentional around our critical thinking and our creative thinking that leads to solving business problems. And AI can actually solve some of those intractable problems in your business that you could not do without AI. But you have to be willing to, suck it up and try. So
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Yogesh. This has been really great. Where can we learn more? Where can we find you?
you can find me on LinkedIn. Just search my name, Yogesh Chavda. If you want to use those LinkedIn things, mine is called Yogesh-AI-marketing. If you want to use that as a way to find me on LinkedIn, I have a business page as well called Y2S Consulting, and then I have a third page on LinkedIn called Next Frontier in Insights. So on my personal page, you'll find me posting practically every day about something or the other related to AI or whatever. On my business page, you'll see and also on my personal page, I post a newsletter every Monday morning that's starting to emphasize a lot more from a C-suite perspective, what you should be thinking about. And then on my business page, I'm translating that C-suite perspective into an insights perspective as to what should the head of insights do if, related to that particular topic area. So I'm actually now creating two separate newsletters, one on my personal page, on my business page. So that's just started this month, in fact. And then on the Next Frontier in Insights, that's where I post all my podcasts that I do every 2 weeks. So literally in about 3 hours time, I'm doing my LinkedIn live session as well today. But I do that every 2 weeks. So you'll find all my content on LinkedIn primarily. And if you want to find it on Spotify, at least a podcast, you'll find that there, as well as on Substack as well. So
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. And what a great transition, because believe it or not, we too do have a newsletter.
Yes.
there you go.
So you can get the show highlights, the behind the show insights, and what's coming up next into our next episode. You may scan the QR code on screen or visit us at digitaldownload.live/newsletter. Yogesh, on behalf of the panelists,
Thank you.
And to you, thank you so much, and to our audience, and see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Yogesh. That's fantastic. Look
Thank
at all
you.
the engagement we got as well.